And to answer your direct question, we have a deal.
The end of the road could be in sight on infrastructure. Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thank you for joining us. After weeks of negotiations with a variety of senators, the question of whether or not an infrastructure deal could happen has been answered.
I know there are some of my party who discouraged me from seeking an agreement with our Republican colleagues, who said that we should go bigger and go alone. To them, I say this. I've already shown in my young presidency that I'm prepared to do whatever needs to get done to move the country forward.
President Biden promised to work across the aisle, and when it comes to infrastructure, the White House and a bipartisan group of 21 senators have agreed to a roughly $1 trillion deal. It includes $579 billion in new spending for roads, bridges, tunnels, and broadband. Overshadowing the news has been the search for survivors of a deadly building collapse in Miami. At least 3 people died in the collapse. As of late Thursday, dozens of people were still unaccounted for. President Biden said the federal government is closely monitoring the situation and stands ready to assist local and state authorities. Meanwhile, Democrats are pushing forward with plans to uncover the causes of the Capitol riot after Republicans blocked a bipartisan commission. On Thursday, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced she's launching a select committee to focus on 2 key areas.
One is about the root causes of it, the white supremacy, the anti-Semitism, the Islamophobia, all the rest of it that was so evident when you see a sweatshirt on one of the people saying, Camp Auschwitz. The other is the security of the Capitol and what it means to be ready for such an insurrection. While I think we could have been better prepared, I don't think anybody would have foreseen an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. So the timetable will be...
Speaker Pelosi said the timeline will be as long as it takes. For more, let's bring in Nikole Killion, Anita Kumar, and Sarah Westwood. Nikole is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Anita is a White House correspondent and associate editor at Politico. And Sarah is a political and investigative correspondent at the Washington Examiner. Welcome to you all. Anita, the sticking point had been how to pay for this infrastructure bill. What did they agree to, and where do things go from here?
Well, it's still a long way away from a real deal, even though they did strike an agreement on the framework. So what the framework talks about is a $600 billion in new spending. And of course, that's much less than President Biden wanted. We haven't seen all the details, so we're still waiting for details on this spending, but they are talking about using money that hadn't been spent before on coronavirus and other things. They're talking about beefing up security or enforcement, rather, at the IRS to go after people and large companies and wealthy people that haven't paid their taxes. And we're still getting some details about that. What they said today was that they agreed to the amount of new spending, and that was really key. And of course, what they're spending it on, which is more of the traditional pieces of infrastructure like roads and bridges that they have agreed to. This is what this package would be about. So they've eliminated a lot of the other things that the president wanted to be in the initial package.
Well, Nikole, while the moderate Senators Sinema and Manchin seem to come out winners in these negotiations, progressives are drawing lines in the sand over a separate, larger bill, which would include their priorities like child care and climate. What's likely to happen?
Well, you know, what we heard today from Speaker Pelosi is that they're basically not going, and we've heard similar messaging from Leader Schumer as well, is that they're not going to move one package without the other, meaning that in addition to taking up this bipartisan bill, they also plan to move forward with a reconciliation package. And so that being said, you know, I think really it's going to come down to this $6 trillion price tag that's been floated, at least here on on the Senate side, we have heard a mixed reaction, for instance, earlier today from Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, who feels that is the right amount, and that's certainly an amount that Bernie Sanders has been floating. But on the other hand, you have folks like Congressman Gottheimer, who heads the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a bipartisan group of lawmakers, who feels like he's not sure if some of his constituencies could basically swallow that big of a number. So look, there's still a lot that remains to be worked out, but certainly progressives have felt very strongly that this is the time to go big. This is the time to go bold when it comes to issues particularly of human infrastructure, whether that is child care, whether that is, other proposals too, like climate, which has been a big sticking point for progressives as well, so much so that many of them threatened that they might not support a bipartisan package until they see more details coming out of this reconciliation package. So as Anita mentioned, there's still a lot of negotiating here that needs to happen before we know whether or not, both of these bills will come out successfully through the Congress.
And Sarah, it appears the Biden administration has yielded to Republicans on two issues: repurposing unspent COVID money to fund police departments and dispatching the vice president to the southern border. How might this play out?
Well, that potentially shows you that these are areas where the Biden administration, where Democrats are recognizing that there is a political vulnerability. On the border, Biden was sort of able to successfully take that issue off his plate by tapping Vice President Harris to deal with the root causes of the migration crisis. But it's still an area where the administration could be criticized for not handling it well and not responding to it quickly enough. And on the crime front, of course, President Biden delivering a speech yesterday in which he acknowledged that violent crime is on the rise across the country could be viewed as another concession to the kind of political pressure that Biden is facing from the right. He had mentioned in that speech that he did not want to see COVID money reshuffled, and yet the very next day, here he is backing a deal that does spend some of that COVID relief funding on infrastructure. One of the reasons why it might be difficult for Democrats to get that reconciliation portion of the bill through Congress is because you are starting to see some economic difficulties, particularly inflation, that critics, even on the left, are attributing to the massive size of the COVID relief bill. The president had argued that the other portion of his infrastructure package that includes the so-called human infrastructure, the care infrastructure, it was such a huge influx of spending that he argued was necessary to help the economy recover. But there are signs that the economy is now recovering well on its own, with the exception of the fact that prices are going up for American consumers. So that could take away some of the justification to get that other piece of the infrastructure bill through and scare away some more moderate Democrats who don't feel comfortable signing on to something with that large a price tag, because it could run as much as $6 trillion against the backdrop of inflation.
Yeah, economists are watching what happens here with inflation very closely. Well, Nikole, let's talk about Nancy Pelosi's select committee to investigate the Capitol riot. What separates it from the other ongoing investigations?
Well, the main difference is obviously with the commission that was proposed previously, it would have been a bipartisan commission with an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. And, really that was the aim, to kind of have this commission really be broad in scope and kind of steered away from politics. So what makes a difference here is that by doing this select committee, Democrats do kind of have the upper hand in selecting who might be on. Speaker Pelosi didn't tip her hat there as far as saying who might lead this committee and how it will be structured, but she did make clear that it will be tasked with looking at the root causes of January 6th and also looking at some of the security issues as well, and she didn't necessarily put a timetable or a timeline for when it would have to issue a final report, if you will. So there's still a lot of details that need to be worked out, but I did ask her earlier today, why not hold out for perhaps another vote here in the Senate, because you'll recall 6 Republicans signed on, so really they just needed to find about 4 more, and she just said, look, it's been 6 months, we need to move forward. She's not completely giving up on the idea of a bipartisan commission, but she felt it was important to keep the focus and the attention on investigating this attack, and so she feels that the select committee is the next step.
Well, Sarah, I'm curious, is Speaker Pelosi doing anything to blunt that criticism of a committee being too partisan with this select committee that she's choosing to move forward with?
Well, talking to some Republicans on Capitol Hill, there is frustration a little bit with Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy for having allowed negotiations over a bipartisan version of this commission to happen in the first place. He tapped a moderate Republican member to lead negotiations on behalf of Republicans to get a bipartisan commission. And if you recall, a deal was actually reached. It was something that had the expectation that GOP leadership was going to sign on to it, and then McCarthy seemingly changed his mind, pulled back from that. So Speaker Pelosi has a pretty powerful talking point here, because she can point to that whole process and say that there was an option for Republicans to participate in a bipartisan version of this investigation, but they balked at the last minute. And if McCarthy had not authorized participation in those talks, and there was never a structure and outline of a bipartisan commission, then Pelosi might be more susceptible to accusations that she is forging ahead in a really partisan way. One of the key points about this commission and the way it will be structured, based on what we understand so far, that's different from the bipartisan commission is that it doesn't appear to have a deadline for the completion of its work. It will go on as long as the Democrats running it would like that to occur. That was a huge concern of Republicans when they were talking about the investigation, that perhaps it could be dragged on into the midterms and used as a political weapon against members who would really just rather stop talking about January 6th and leave that in the past. Now there is no deadline, and that is a key point that Republicans could maybe regret not taking a better deal when they had the chance.
Well, Anita, Politico has a piece detailing growing frustration among Democrats despite controlling Congress and the White House. What is behind that, and how does it factor into the upcoming midterms?
Yeah, it's a really interesting phenomenon that we're starting to see Democrats, particularly progressives, starting to come out and really criticize the president. We hadn't seen that in the first few months of the administration, sort of giving the president time to, get his feet wet and start working on things. The frustration really is that the president has focused on infrastructure, and they're not opposed to infrastructure, but they want to get other things done, things that the president promised to do on the campaign trail. So talking about immigration reform, firearms restrictions that he had talked about and continues to talk about. Of course, there was the voting bill that just got blocked in the Senate by Republicans. So there is some frustration that it hasn't been more expansive. What the president says, and he even said it today, is, look, I passed this massive coronavirus recovery bill, and that's something that I accomplished. Obviously, Congress passed it. He signed it into law earlier this year. But what people are saying, what Democrats are starting to say is, look, well, that was great, and we did need to focus on COVID, but there are so many other things that they wish the president would do. Some have even said, look, he shouldn't have made the the infrastructure package his top priority. They wish that he had done that with the voting rights bill or immigration or, gun control. You name it. There has been a long list of things that they are waiting to happen. And of course, you might say, look, this happens to every new president. They don't get things done fast enough. But there's really a couple issues at play here. One is Donald Trump was president. There was a lot of frustration by Democrats, of course, and the expectations were very, very high that Joe Biden could come in and turn things around very quickly. Of course, the other thing is the timetable. You might talk about in terms of being so far away, all the way next year. but actually the timetable for the president to get anything done is very, very small. The window is small. If he doesn't get something done really by this summer, by the time of the August recess for Congress, the window is almost closed, because next year it's all going to be about the midterms. And once that summer break hits and they come back later this fall, the window is very, very much closing. The president has most of his power really right now at the beginning. And so there's a frustration that he hasn't done more, and he hasn't done it fast enough. And so we'll see what happens with that.
It's hard to believe that July is almost here. So time really is flying. Nikole Killion, Anita Kumar, and Sarah Westwood, good to have you all. Thank you.